There's a problem that's all too prevalent in our society. It's an addiction that's rarely talked about. It's an addiction that's rarely talked about, but it's one that can wreck lives and destroy marriages. It's the problem of pornography. Dr. James Dobson talks about pornography and tells why it's addictive, progressive, and deadly.
My greatest concern, and one that I focus on a little bit with you all, is the addiction of pornography. Now, you know that hard drugs are addictive, and you know that marijuana can get a hold of you emotionally and so on, but very few people realize just how addictive pornography really is. Not so much for girls, not so much for girls, not so much for girls, but very much for guys. One exposure to a 13-year-old boy at just the right time, and he will grab that, come there for the rest of his life.
Yep, that's totally how it works, Jim Dobb.
Interesting thing about pornography.
Oh, the underneath the nutsack shot. Is that what we're talking about? Oh, that's not what we're talking about.
It functions very much like drugs. You take a little bit and it goes a long ways.
No, James, that's not how addiction works. That's not how drugs work. It's spoken by a dipshit like you that's obviously never fucking struggled with addiction or drugs. A little bit does not last a long time. It does not go a long way. That's why people get hooked on shit, is because they keep chasing that initial high, and they end up getting addicted and continually chasing this buzz, and it devolves into many different paths you can take at that point.
But you bore with that and you take a little more, and you need more, and you need more, you need more. I served on the Attorney General's Commission on Pornography for 18 months. It was one of the most miserable experiences of my life. Our responsibility was to evaluate this stuff and make recommendations to the government.
That's right, folks. Your tax dollars were going to pay so James Dobson could get paid to watch porn on the government dime.
And the material that we had to watch is infinitely worse than this. I won't even describe it to you, but it's terrible. And then what happens with an addiction to pornography? The characteristics of pornography is that,
Oh, wet ass pussy.
that you bore with it.
Oh, yeah, that was my next guess. You get bored with it, because I've gotten bored with it.
And they go to the perversions. How does a man, particularly, who didn't start out this way, develop a great excitement for
Neck wrestling, otter lubrication,
for
brim jobbing, or fish knobbing, carp fondling,
for
goat yodeling,
for
swine suckling,
for
pecker punching, which is chicken abuse,
for
mule roping, or beaver racing,
how's that happen?
and mule
They
felching.
call it chicken porn. And until it was outlawed in 1983, it was a billion-dollar industry in this country.
Chicken porn, you say? Chicken porn.
An awful lot of people. How'd that happen?
The second law of thermodynamics. The third law of
It
thermodynamics.
happened typically because they walk down this path and get to that point and jump the fire trail.
Yep. Fire trail jumping. That's the logical fucking choice.
What you see mostly are these things. Now, I wish I'd have moved this whole thing over.
I mean, It's a chalkboard, Jim Dobb. You got eraser technology. You could just use your hand, your sleeve. Anything would work. No. Fuck it. Do it live.
Because the final stage of this is death. Is death. And that's the way sin is. The wages of sin is death.
Oh, way to bring it right back around there, fucking Jim Dobb. Wrap it up in a nice tight little bow there.
Ted Bundy was a nice looking guy. In fact, if he were here and your age and just in your midst, and I asked you to look around and select the future mass murderer out of this bunch, you would not have picked Ted Bundy. He looked like Joe College. There's another serial murderer loose right now that I've worked with the police on.
Spoiler alert, gang. James Dobson never worked on the Green River Task Force or the Green River case or anything to do with Gary Leon Ridgway. James Dobson is a liar.
They call him the Green River Killer. And he started up in Seattle. Anybody from the state of Washington? You heard of the Green River Killer?
Nobody? Sweet. I'm just going to start fucking lying to you then.
Killed 40, 50 women up there, they think. Came down to Portland, then down to San Francisco and Los Angeles. Last I heard, he was in San Diego.
And Jim Dobb was never on the Green River Task Force. It was Bob Keppel and Dave Reichert. We have Jim Dobb lying again. As far as we know, Gary Ridgway was exclusively in Washington State.
And there's just one right after the other dying. They feel there's 250 plus women whom he's killed. And he's following the same pattern that Ted Bundy did.
Nope, even more lies. But in this moron's defense, they hadn't caught Gary Ridgway yet. But it turns out Gary Ridgway was highly motivated by religious reasons for murdering women. He was very, very Christian, and in fact, he thought he was doing a good thing.
He spent 10 years on death row, and while he was on death row, an attorney named John Tanner and his wife Marcia.
John and Marcia Tanner can go fuck themselves. Because like I said before, Ted Bundy's already a fucking Christian. So even if you accomplish your goal, of making Ted Bundy more Christian, you didn't do shit. You went in and fucking played magic spells with a fucking serial killer, trying to get him brownie points with your fucking God to get him into heaven with the fucking people he killed and did despicable shit to. You're pieces of garbage, all of you.
Took it upon themselves to minister to Ted.
Diligently dealt with, and I think successfully, with the love of God.
Ted already believed in God. Your God, the very God that you're witnessing to Ted Bundy or your friends were witnessing to Ted Bundy about, Ted already believed in that God, you fucking moron.
Sure, he'd killed 28 women, but he is still a creation of God.
That's right, madam. The look of disgust on your face is the correct response.
And he needed God like everybody else. And
what about Ted Bundy's last victim that we know of, 12-year-old Kimberly Leach? What about her? And what about what she needed from God at that point?
There comes word from Lake City, that's about 90 miles east of Tallahassee, that a junior high school student, Kimberly Leach, has disappeared during the middle of the school day.
Leave campus, we were 12, and she was very shy.
And God sat and watched her get murdered and other worse things than just being murdered. And he did nothing. Nothing for Kimberly Leach, 12 years old. But we should hope that he forgives Ted Bundy.
John and Marcia went into that prison for 200 plus hours.
Christians You are garbage. You are trash humans.
In April, about 2 months after she went missing, Kimberly Diane Leach, her body was found. She'd been murdered. She had been placed in the little lean-to shed in the hog pen in this wooded area behind the Swanee River State Park.
Was just innocent.
A Lake City grand jury issued a sealed indictment which presumably names Bundy for the murder of 12-year-old Kimberly Diane Lee.
And led him into, I think, only God knows, I think a genuine relationship.
Oh, thank goodness, James. Thank goodness, Jim Dobb, that somebody was there to make sure that somebody could speak up to the Lord for Ted Bundy, on Ted Bundy's behalf.
With Jesus Christ.
Your God is imaginary, but the sentiment itself and you, James Dobson, are disgusting.
Now that's offensive to some people.
No. What's offensive, Jim Dobb, is that you are more worried about the serial killer, the man who went from state to state across the nation killing young women and children and doing unspeakable acts with their bodies before, during, and after he murdered them. And you are worried about him, but you never mention any of the victims. You never mention the 12-year-old little girl that he did the despicable things with. You're worried about getting the brownie points from the Jeebus from saving the one that killed and did the bad shit to them, instead of wondering why that your God didn't step in and stop the bad shit from happening to them.
The thought of Ted Bundy going to heaven, it just...
My only hope so far is the two women that I've saw staring daggers into this motherfucker's soul is hopefully this shit turned them away from Christianity. I hope both of those ladies found their way out of this bullshit cult.
Doesn't seem right, does it? And yet the Lord said there's no sin that he can't forgive.
It's in the
and
Bible!
I believe Ted found the Lord.
Praise God.
2 years before he died, John Tanner called me on behalf of Ted. And he knows the press will not allow him to get that message out because they obviously hated him, and perhaps for good reason.
Perhaps, Jim Dobb, perhaps they hated Ted Bundy, killer of women and children, for a good reason.
They said he wants to release that information through you.
Almost like Ted Bundy thought that he could manipulate a gullible Christian sap like old Jim Dobb fucking James Dobson.
The death warrant will be in effect.
Just a few days before his execution, he decides he's going to start confessing because he felt that if he finally starts doling out information, perhaps the state will keep him alive indefinitely.
I'm just thinking that that's probably what happened, that he manipulated the shit out of your stupid Christian ass.
So a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, the telephone rang. John Tanner was on the phone. He said, the way has been cleared for the execution of Ted Bundy. He only has 6 more days to live. He wants you to come to Florida.
Things that had been traditional is that death row inmates have been allowed a last interview of their choosing. Bundy had chosen Dr. James Dobson.
That James Dobson interview was Ted Bundy's last gasp attempt at avoiding the death penalty by becoming an anti-pornography spokesperson.
Now, I flew down to Florida immediately. I got there just 2 days before he was to be executed. And you talk about one wild scene. It was a circus. And none of those members of the press...
Members of the press and media like you, James Dobson, you silly fucker,
could get an interview with Ted because he wouldn't talk to him.
It's almost like Ted Bundy had a plan to like slow drip out these bodies that he had hidden and buried over a extended period of time, that he could spend life in prison instead of getting the electric chair. Almost like that. And he was using you as a mouthpiece and a tool to further his progress in that direction.
The eyes and ears of the world, and they're there to interview Ted Bundy or to get a story, and he won't talk.
Ted Bundy had an agenda, and his agenda kind of lined up with an agenda that he knew you had, because Ted Bundy was already a Christian. Let's fucking be honest here.
The basic humanity and basic spirit that God gave me was intact, but it unfortunately became overwhelmed at times.
He was raised Christian. He professed to be a Christian. All this shit well before your friends or whoever the fuck came here to Christian up already Christian Ted Bundy.
Basically, I mean, in the eyes of the law, certainly in the eyes of God, you're responsible.
The prison wouldn't talk to him, and they hear that this guy's coming in from California that has a private interview with him.
That damn James Dobson.
I arrived and was ushered to the prison.
Kind of like Ted was using what little bit of power he had from inside the prison to fluff your ego and make you feel special, Jim Dobb.
And I went through one of the strangest, most bizarre experiences of my life. They finally took me into this inner chamber, and then they brought Ted in. They took him in a little room and strip searched him before he could even talk to me.
For the record, you are guilty of killing many women and girls. Is
Yes.
that correct?
Yes, that's true.
Ted, how did it happen? How did this moment come about?
That jumping off point where you begin to wonder if maybe actually doing it will give you that which is beyond just reading about it or looking at it.
Ted, after you committed your first murder, what was the emotional effect on you?
He killed over 38 women. Who gives a fuck how it made him feel? Like, for real, James Dobson, you're a piece of shit and you're interviewing another piece of shit.
What happened in the days after that?
It was like coming out of some kind of horrible trance or dream.
Awful Ted? Was it awful, Ted? Was it like coming out of like a trance or a possession by demons or some shit? Or was the allure of the decomposing body just sexually too much for you to handle and you had to revisit it? Because it's not like you just killed them and then left them there. You came back and continued your activities with their dead and decaying bodies. You are a necrophile, and they try to sugarcoat this shit like that Ted Bundy wasn't doing that shit.
I can only liken it to after, I don't want to over-dramatize it, but to have been possessed by something so awful and so alien, and then the next morning wake up from it, remember what happened, and realize that...
Realize what? Oh, I want to go back out there and have sex with that dead body before my Young Republicans meeting at fucking Puget Sound University or whatever, Ted, you piece of shit.
Basically, I mean, in the eyes of the law, certainly in the eyes of God, you're responsible.
Eyes of God. What was the eyes of God doing while Ted Bundy was having his way forcefully with young children, at least the age of 12 that we know of, and then revisiting their dead bodies and doing that until decomposition happened or, took place for so long that he couldn't stand the smell anymore? Where was God's eyes then? Oh, he was watching you do that shit. So he's just as pervy and sick and fucked up as you are, Ted.
To wake up in the morning and realize what I had done.
Think, can I make it up on Taylor Mountain in time to have sex with that decomposing body before I have to be at work?
And with a clear mind and all my essential moral and ethical feelings intact at that moment.
Packed up some shampoo and some makeup and took it up on Taylor Mountain to those bodies, and I shampooed their hair and put some makeup on them to continue my activities.
Absolutely horrified that I was capable of doing something like that.
So horrified, in fact, that I was planning at that very moment of being horrified of how I could get back out there and have sex with that dead body.
You really hadn't known that before?
Basically, I was a normal person.
A normal young Republican conservative with aspirations of necrophilia like anyone else.
I wasn't some guy hanging out at bars or a bum.
Shit, Ted, maybe you should have tried it. You know, maybe you should have tried being a bum or hanging out at the bar or something. But no, wait. You're lying right now to James Dobson. I forgot you're a fucking liar. Because you've already said in prior interviews that you used to get shit-faced or at least very buzzed up and intoxicated on booze to lower your inhibitions so you could get up the courage to attack the young ladies you were attacking.
I wasn't a pervert. I wasn't a pervert.
Yeah, you were. If anybody in the motherfucking world was a pervert, Ted, it was Ted motherfucking Bundy. You were a perverty fucking pervert.
In the sense that, you know, people look at somebody and say, I know there's something wrong with him, and just tell. I mean, I was essentially a normal person. I had good friends. I led a normal life, except for this one small but very potent and very destructive segment of it that I kept very secret and very close to myself and didn't let anybody know about it.
Truth be known, this fuckface killed probably over 100 women. And that's just a little tiny portion of his personality that he kept very hidden inside him. Because Ted's going to angle that he's the victim here.
And part of the shock and horror for my dear friends and family years ago when I was first arrested was that there was no clue. They looked at me and they looked at the all-American boy. And I
more lies, at least twice, his girlfriend turned him into the police.
I mean, I wasn't perfect, but I want to be quite candid with you. I was okay. Okay.
Oh, getting a little sassy with James there, with Jim Dobb. If that was me, I'd have reached across there and bitch slapped you in the fucking face, Ted. No problem getting them fucking dental impressions, because I'd have knocked your fucking teeth on the floor.
I was. The basic humanity and basic spirit that God gave me was intact.
It's in the Bible! Praise God.
But unfortunately, it became overwhelmed at times. We grew up in regular families, and pornography can reach out and snatch a kid out of any house today.
Or some prick murderer named Ted Bundy could snatch some person out of their house. But yeah, let's talk about pornography.
He snatched me out of my home. It snatched me out of my home.
Yep. Ted, you're totally the victim. Totally the victim of pornography, and you are not the problem here.
20, 30 years ago. And as diligent as my parents were, and as good a Christian home as we had, and we had a wonderful Christian home.
Good thing James Dobson's here to save this man with Christianity, because it sounds like he seriously needed it.
There is no protection against the kinds of influences that are loose in the society. That
Yahweh is powerless against pornography. 13, powerless. Christianity 0.
You feel this
trying
really
to squeeze some tears out. You gotta grunt until a little bit of blood comes out in your poop, Ted. That's how you get the tears to come out.
I'm sure, Ted, if I were able to ask you the questions that are being asked out there, one of the most important as you come down to perhaps your final hours, are you thinking about all those victims out there who are so...
Oh, that's what we call in the business a hard no, Jim Dobb. That's a hard no from Ted.
Years...
And those thoughts that I have steadfast.
Man, he was trying to grunt out some fucking tears right there. Did you see that shit? He was trying to human so fucking hard that he almost cried from trying to human, but he can't.
And diligently dealt with, I think successfully, with the love of God.
Yeah, it was a total success, Ted. Total success. I mean, screw all the victims. You were a total success because of your diligence. You are the strong man. You are the victim simultaneously. Good job, Ted. Good job.
And yet it's reopened that, and I felt the pain, and I felt the horror again of all that. And I can only hope.
Oh yeah, Ted, you're totally the victim, man. Yeah, and you felt the horror of the shit you did to other people. That's what you're talking about. You got James Dobson there nodding along like a fucking idiot.
And let's come into the present now, because what I'm talking about happened 30 I mean, some of the violence in the movies that come into homes that they wouldn't show in X-rated adult theaters 30 years ago. This stuff,
slasher movies that you're talking about.
30 years after Ted Bundy's crimes, the movies, right? Those movies are based on your fucked up shit, Ted. Fuck you both.
Would have happened to me if I had seen.
And I think this right here is the one actual genuine moment of Ted being truthful.
That was scary enough. That was scary enough. Here I am.